you may have watched the video that I made criticising a certain Ashling O'Brien of the Dublin Atheists Society or something like that. I should have checked that out really before I started this video, shouldn't I? Ashling O'Brien has responded to me, and I'd like to thank her both for replying to me, for the content of the reply, and also for the tone of the reply, which was unusually positive, actually. There was I got a couple of comments, I can't remember where they were, prior to that, with people saying, oh, Ashling O'Brien, she's another one of these types that are infested by this kind of free thought blogs mentality. And what I've got to say is that they're wrong, because, you know, the whole problem that I have with that kind of mentality isn't whether somebody labels themselves a feminist or elsewhere whether somebody labels themselves a men's right activist or anything like that. I couldn't give a crap about any of that. All that I want is that people are willing to engage with views that they don't agree with, because we're all willing to engage with people that fucking agree with us. That doesn't really prove anything. But the fact that you fundamentally disagree with somebody and still welcome the chance to have that discussion, I think counts for a lot. Maybe some of the disagreements that I have with Ashling, that Ashling has with myself, are not fundamental. We agree on a lot. But still, the tone of the response I very much welcome, so I'd like to thank Ashling for that. I just wish there was more of that going on. Not that I can hold Ashling any more responsible for that than I hold myself responsible for that. So what I would say is then, this is going to be, you can probably tell already, this is not going to be the most structured video that I've ever made. So it's probably a case, grab yourself a cup of coffee, maybe have a nice little slice of cake while you're at it. What I would ask, if you've got the time, you know, if you have the time available and you haven't seen the original video, watch the original video first. Read Ashling's blog in its entirety, this particular blog entry in its entirety, and then I'm trying to micromanage your time here, aren't I? Which I perhaps shouldn't be doing. What I will say is that if you've got time to do more than just watch this video, and it's a choice between watching more of me, which I usually would advise, or reading Ashling's blog. Read Ashling's blog, because it's very, very interesting. There's some information on there with regard to the situation in the Republic of Ireland with respect to abortion, which I found absolutely fascinating, which informed me. So I would invite everybody to read what Ashling has to say. Notwithstanding that, there were some subjects of some disagreements of substance between Ashling's position and mine, amongst the things that we agree on, which I would like to talk about in this video. Before I go on to the Ashling specifics, I want to talk about something which was perhaps hinted on in Ashling's piece more than actually stated, but which was actually stated by a number of other people, which was this kind of position, something along the lines that if you find something immoral, okay, somebody else's choice immoral, perhaps you shouldn't say so, because to say so might kind of impact on their ability to make a decision. It might influence or pressurize their decision. So really, you should just kind of keep your mouth shut. People phrased it in different ways. What I will do is I'll read you out a piece that Conference Report, the YouTuber Conference Report, wrote as a response to my blog. I did a written blog on the Dawkins thing as well. I'll link that as well, in case you've really got a lot of time on your hands, and you can read that as well. This is what Conference Report had to say. Pro-lifers in many cases have no actual power to prevent abortions taking place. They just make their personal moral positions loudly known and try to influence public opinion, open bracket, and maybe legislation, close bracket, to fall in line with that opinion. Dawkins is pro-choice, but is making it known that his personal moral position would restrict that choice. Choice restricted by influential opinion isn't really choice at all, I would have thought. I've got really real problems with this way of thinking, because, like I say, what it seems to amount to is, if you think that somebody's doing something immoral, okay, that if you tell them it's immoral, that it's restricting their choice, that it's kind of coercing them or pressuring them slightly. and so we shouldn't do it. But isn't that exactly what the business of morality is, right? I mean, this is something that I've discussed in many different videos, in many different shapes and forms. That is precisely why we make moral statements in the first place. It is to pressure, it is to coerce, it is to influence the choice of others. And why wouldn't we do that if we genuinely thought it was immoral? Okay, we're not just talking about pretending that something is immoral. We genuinely hold something to be an immoral choice to make. Why wouldn't we want to dissuade people from making that choice, even if it's a situation where we still wish to uphold their right to make a choice? I gave the example before of affairs, of being in a relationship with somebody and saying to them, I'm going to remain faithful to you, I'm not going to fuck anybody else, okay? And then going and doing it, okay? Having an affair, sleeping behind somebody's back. That is something that most of us think is immoral, but wouldn't want to make illegal. So should we never mention the fact that we think it's immoral, that we think it's wrong? We should just shut up about it, because if we were to say something, then people might be less inclined to have affairs. Well, no, we do say something because we want people to be less inclined to have affairs. And so it is with this case with abortion. If Richard Dawkins really thinks that it is immoral to have a child with Down syndrome, if you know well in advance that it is going to have Down syndrome, then why, even though he wants to allow people, yes, legally I'm going to allow them the decision, why wouldn't he want to pressurise them away from making what he sees is the wrong decision, to not have an abortion in that case? Surely he's going to want to try and pressurise that decision because he wants to try and push people into doing the right thing. That's the very point, surely, of morality. That is the business of morality. As I say, that isn't a point that Ashling directly hits, but it's a point that she kind of skirts around. And one of the ways in which she skirts around, well, I'll come to that in a minute. First thing with regard to what Ashling had to say, she picked me up on something, right? I said about if we can't judge people in terms of the morality of their actions, how can we judge anything? If we can't judge women and we can't judge people generally, how can we judge things like whaling or the Israeli-Palestine conflict? And she correctly points out that there is a difference. And I'll sort of reword what I think that she was saying, which is the difference is, well, this is what Ashling had to say. Ashling had to say, if I pull up Ashling's blog, where are we now? I would draw an important distinction here. When we're talking about these types of examples, we're referring to situations. Yes, these situations are made up of individual people, but they differ from any discussion on an abortion issue insofar as abortion is about the personal and medical decision that an individual woman has to make. She is the only one who knows her own circumstances, her own mental health, her finances, her worries, her concerns. Okay, so I do actually agree with Ashling here, insofar as there is only one Israeli-Palestine conflict. So if you feel that you know enough about the Palestine-Israeli conflict to comment on the Palestine-Israeli conflict, then you are commenting on the one instance that is a Palestine-Israeli conflict. And the same thing with whaling. There is only one worldwide whaling moratorium, so much as there is. And there's only one Japan that whales for scientific purposes, and only one Norway that whales for scientific purposes. So it is easier to comment on in that aspect. Whereas when you were talking about women having abortions, they all have their own individual circumstances. So any moral argument you make has to allow for the fact of these individual circumstances. And yet we do make moral statements about people irrespective of their individual circumstances, don't we? We say that, for example, what about punching old people on the end of the nose? What about giving an old woman a little bop? Right on the end of it, somewhat harder than that, but an old woman, a bop, right on the end of the beak. Okay, we would say that, unless that's in self-defence, obviously, but old women tend not to go around savaging people for no good reason. But other than in self-defence, we would say that is immoral, and that's without knowing the individual circumstance of the bop perpetrators or the old women, okay? Other than the self-defense thing, we think, so, well, no, the fact that you are physically assaulting an old woman is enough in and of itself to say that that is immoral. And so it well may be with circumstances regarding abortion. For my part, I didn't agree with Dawkins on Down syndrome, but if you had a really severely handicapped fetus, we know in advance that it's not going to have any standard of life throughout its life, and it's going to cost society millions and millions and millions, then I can't contrive of any back circumstance that is going to be enough to make that an ethical decision to carry on with that pregnancy, save from, as a purely philosophical basis, if you had a very strong religious conviction and believed that everybody has some kind of sacred soul and that God has decreed that it's wrong for you to take any kind of life under any circumstances, then I could understand that within the confines of your belief, that what you are doing is moral. But from my external perspective, you're judging, working to a different set of standards, working to my standards, and let's be honest, we all make our moral statements working to our own standards and not somebody else. Your decision is still immoral, and I'm going to say it's immoral because I'm hoping to influence decisions. And this moves on to the next thing that Ashling has to say. Let me read you what Ashling has to say. Noel also gives an ethical dilemma to suggest that there are cases when we may judge a pregnant woman. This is what I'd said. And what about the mother of the unborn child who is on heroin, who has a baby? The baby is born addicted to heroin. Can we even say that is immoral? Do we still have to remain neutral on that one, Ashling? So Ashling says, can I ask a situation in return? What good will judging her do apart from making us feel morally superior? In what way will it change the situation for either her, a possibly vulnerable addict, or her child? What are we judging her on? Are we going to judge her for being an addict, for getting pregnant, for not terminating the pregnancy? And then a little bit of an aside. She came back, so yes, of course we can judge, but will it really achieve anything constructive? Condemning women for their choices they make about their bodies is ultimately an exercise in futility. I couldn't disagree more with that. I understand what Ashling is driving at, that it's all a little bit too late. The act has been done. All you're going to do is make somebody feel guilty for doing something which you think is immoral, which is something that we do all the time, by the way. If you truly think something is immoral, then you're not really going to feel too many pangs of guilt from making somebody feel a little bit guilty about them knowing that you think it is immoral. But that's an aside. When we send people to prison, when we punish people, let's talk about sending people to prison. I suggest we do it for three reasons. One is to take them out of circulation. One is to discourage them from doing it again. And the third one is to discourage other people from doing the same thing. Yes, we maybe try and rehabilitate them would be stopping them, I suppose, doing the same thing again. So those are the three things. Okay. So here's the thing, Ashling. In terms of taking when we make moral criticism of somebody, it certainly doesn't take them out of circulation or stop them, in this case, having another heroin-addled baby again, does it? It doesn't stop that. But what it might do, that societal criticism might sway the balance. You know, if there's no criticism whatsoever, then really they've got away with it scot-free. They've done this thing that we regard as immoral, and there's been no penalty whatsoever for that. They've done it. Nobody's criticised them, because who are we to judge, right? And so they're just as likely, one would think, to do it again. If we criticise them, if we say, actually, I think that's totally fucking immoral to do that, right? You may have been addicted to heroin. It is difficult to get off heroin, but people do manage to do it. It's not impossible. And all of a sudden, you've got this overriding reason of another human being whose life you're going to get off to a spectacularly shit start by having it born addicted to heroin. Now, I think the moral thing to do there is to bite the bullet and to get off heroin. Okay, so that's what I would say. That would be my position. Okay, that might be enough if this woman chooses to have another baby to make sure that she gets herself clean, either for the pregnancy or goes cold. I don't know how you go cold turkey through a pregnancy. I'm not a fucking doctor. I assume you don't just stop dead. That would probably be bad for the baby as well. You probably need to gradually scale down somehow. I don't know. But one, it's the impact on the individual, and two, it's the impact on everybody else. Most of us know that most other people think that giving birth to a baby that is addicted to heroin, is going to be severely frowned upon, right? So we live in that environment when we know that that's really not regarded as a very morally cool thing to do, and so that affects all of our positions, doesn't it? It maybe makes us all a little bit more responsible, a little bit less likely to do that. And that is the case, Ashling, I'm suggesting, with all the moral indignation we show for things, whether it's justified or not. It's not about some after-the-fact, post-hoc attempt at just making somebody feel bad. It's about making sure that they are less likely to do it in the future, making other people less likely to do the same thing in the future. So your suggestion that there's no material benefit to this kind of moral pontification, I think, is entirely misplaced there. There are material benefits. If there weren't material benefits, we wouldn't bother making moral statements at all, let alone in this specific sphere. Something else that I was going to link to, which Ashling had said, which I'll have to go back to, she'd said it before that last bit, was this. The final decision will have to lie with the woman who is deciding whether or not to continue the pregnancy. This differs from the situation Noel outlines, as they involve the complex interplay of many different parties, often with competing political agendas, which was to do with the Israel-Palestine bit. But while the abortion issue is often politicised, this only serves to detract from the woman and her decision. Now, this is the interesting bit. In an ideal world, perhaps abortion would not be discussed at all. It would just be taken for granted that what a woman chooses to do with her body is of no concern to anyone else. Yeah, having an abortion or not having an abortion is not quite the same as having a tattoo on your leg, I would suggest, because maybe in an ideal world, what a woman chooses to do with her body would be of no concern to anyone else. But when it involves bringing a baby into the world, it is of concern to other people, not least to the baby that's going to be brought into the world, not least to the family that may be then required feel morally compelled to provide support to that baby, not least to society as a whole. When we're talking about, let's forget about the Down syndrome example, because we both agree that Dawkins was over the top. That is our positions. We share that position. But let's talk about a much more severely handicapped child that you choose, say, Ashling, to bring into the world, right? You found out, terrible situation, you're pregnant, the baby's going to have severe handicaps, very low quality of life, and it's going to cost millions and millions and millions in state-funded medical care. And what you're trying to tell me is that this should just be your decision because it doesn't concern anybody else. It doesn't concern anybody else when it's going to involve millions and millions of pounds of state-funded medical care that's paid for, ultimately, by everybody else. I'm sorry, I don't see that one thing follows from the other there. It would be great if the only person that was involved in a woman's abortion decision was the woman. That would be fantastic. But when we're talking about situations where it's going to impact on the rest of society, then the rest of society has been impacted upon or will be impacted upon as a result of that decision. And so you can't expect the rest of society to say absolutely nothing, the same as every other situation where the rest of society is going to be impacted upon. Society feels the need to speak out about it. I'm not going to dredge in everything that Ashling said. There's a lot that Ashling said that I agreed with. One of the things that I agreed with was to do with, I don't think I've written that bit down. Ashling made the point, I'd made the point that one thing that you almost need people, the religious, to be super pro-choice, right? Because What we're talking about is people being pro-choice in spite of thinking something is morally wrong. And what Ashling said is, no, I don't think that's quite what happens. I think people actually adjust their position, that they stop thinking it's morally wrong, effectively. If you have a religious person that doesn't believe in gay marriage or thinks homosexuality is a sin, if they then respect people's rights to be homosexual, it's probably usually because what they've said, it probably isn't a sin after all, okay? And there probably is some of that, right? I didn't include that in my... the two options that I gave. That was maybe a third option, but Ashling doesn't include it as a third option. Ashling pretty much includes it as the only option, and I know that not to be the case, Ashling, because the people that I've spoken to with regard to their religion and homosexuality rather than abortion, because that's the discussions that I've had in this kind of related sphere, haven't had the position. Well, yeah, actually, I'm for gay rights now because I've decided that my religion had got it wrong and that it isn't sinful. No, most of them actually have had the position that they still maintain that it's sinful, but it's for other people to decide. We live in a pluralistic, multicultural society, and it's for other people to decide that as long as it's a sin that's not impacting on other people in the way that me going around stabbing people, for example, would impact on other people, that because they live in a multicultural, multi-faith, pluralistic society, that they accept other people's right to do that. So I still think you're going to be relying on that, Ashling, especially when I think that abortion, the issue of the sanctity of life, is much more fundamental to Christian thinking than the issue of homosexuality is fundamental to Christian thinking. I think that's a peripheral issue. There are a few biblical passages which people love to blow out of all proportion in relation to homosexuality, but it's nothing compared to the whole ideas of sanctity of life and ensoulment, and of God's decision as to whether to take your life away from you, and not your decision as a human being, that impact on this decision of abortion. So I maintain my position on that, Ashling, that you are going to be relying on some religious people still maintaining that they think that abortion is a sin, but seeing that one of these issues related to the autonomy of women or of living in some kind of multicultural society is going to override how they feel about that. Last thing that Ashling said, last clip from Ashling, she said, please continue to support Irish women in their fight for their reproductive rights. Absolutely. I hope everybody that watches this video supports Irish women in their fight for reproductive rights. If you read Ashling's blog, I invite you once again to read it as I wrap up this video now. If you haven't already read it, go and read it and you'll see just how severe the situation is, how totally out of order it is. Well, thank you for the discussion, Ashling. I'll keep watching your blog just in case you get back to me and issue a response to my response. For those that have made it to the end of this video, which has all been done in one take, quite well, you can probably tell it's all been done with one take because there's a certain amount of waffling and tripping over myself at certain points. Thank you for watching anyway, and bye for now. Maybe if I actually clicked the off button, that would help.